Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining the Windows in the Cloud AMA. And joining anywhere, like I mentioned, that you can join your Cloud PC or your AVD VM. And actually, we have a fun, unique topic today. This is going to be a joint AMA. Uh, if you saw before, we wanted to really discuss today and have you bring questions for global availability for Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. And what does that mean? Well, we'll get into that. Let's get your questions going. But before we do, let's go ahead and go around our panel and actually just reintroduce ourselves. I think everyone's been here before. So say hello to the viewers. And I guess we'll just do alphabetical first name. So Donna, if you want to go first.
Hi, everyone. Donna Ryan, PM on the Windows 365 and AVD team. Not my first time here, but glad to be back.
And Doug Coombs, I'm PM on the Windows in the Cloud team, looking after things like connectivity, admin reports, and business continuity disaster recovery.
So that leaves me. So this is actually the first time for me. So my name's Tom Hickling. I'm also a PM in the combined AVD and Windows 365 teams.
Oh, Tom, I'm so sorry. I thought you were here before. Well, everyone give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And for myself, again, I also a PM on the Windows 365 and AVD team, working on the Windows experiences like Switch, Windows 365 Switch, and Windows 11 Boot. But for today's conversation, we really want to get all your questions and highlight some of the investments and releases that really support the global availability of these two awesome products. And just to start, I will go through some announcements, and hopefully it does trigger questions for you. So first, I guess we'll start with Windows 365. If you go to our What's New page for Windows 365, there's some information there. That's ak.ms/W365 What's New. One of them is the FQDNs. So for the service URLs for Windows 365, we consolidated many of the endpoints to a star. Yeah, exactly. All the DNS endpoints to the star. And so star.infra.windows365.microsoft.com, which is for the public offering, and then star.infra.windows365.microsoft.us for the government offering. Also, Windows 365, what we're currently working on that's in development. We have a couple things. We're working on RDP short path and turn to make connections easier, more reliable, and user connectivity checks. That way users can actually check for themselves what their expected state is, if they're having connection issues, if that would be expected. Alerts for cloud PCs that are unavailable. We think this will be really useful. And if you haven't checked the alerting feature yet in Windows 365, please do so. There's an overview in our docs at ak.ms/W365 alerts. And then as we go into the Azure Virtual Desktop, we do have a couple things that are new. One that I think our team is very excited to talk about, which is App Attach. We actually reached preview back in December, but we really want to highlight that now, ak.ms/App Attach preview. And it's really the next iteration of App Attach, making it a lot more flexible for you to create app packages, reuse them across different host pools. And that way you actually can have, again, more scale and not worrying so much about individual VMs, individual host pools, really making that more flexible for you. And then also what we released just recently, the new Teams experience, that new Teams client, that's gone out for your AVD or Windows 365 environments. And so you could check that out at ak.ms/AVD new Teams. But also, we just released our FSLogix 2210 hotfix 3. That was, I believe, last week. And this is compatible with the new Teams client for Windows 10, 11 Enterprise, and also Windows Server 2022. Go ahead and check that out at ak.ms/FSLogix 2210 hotfix 3. And that will lead to the blog post that leads to all the other steps on how you deploy. And then I think one last thing regarding availability is that we're working on that's in development is an increased sign-in frequency. So there are very few things an Entra ID for conditional access that would allow a more often sign-in frequency than 1 hour. There's this every time control, and we are working to support that control. So that was a fun lowdown. There's so much stuff we did in the past couple months, folks. Did I miss anything, Tom, Doug, Donna? Anything you can think of?
No, I think that's covered it.
Mm-hmm. No, agreed.
Yeah. So again, we post all of that in our documentation. All of that was grabbed from our documentation of what's new and in development. So if that was exciting for you, please do continue checking those links in case you missed one of these. So we do have a first question. Let's see, how can I see what region the Windows 365 Cloud PC is deployed into? Great question. Doug, I'm going to tag you in.
Okay, so I'm glad you tagged me, actually, because currently that's not as straightforward as it should be. It is something you can see in the provisioning policy for the specific cloud PC. And if you look at the all cloud PCs, you can trace that back. That said, it's a pretty common question, and I'm working right now on a feature to surface that in some reporting, so that in our new reports area and also in the device overview, we will have some reports that show that, along with things like the client version that's being used, the multimedia version being used, and other things. So right now, not as straightforward as we'd like it to be, but in the next several months, I'm expecting we'll have some better reporting on that and more visibility, so you can see that in the context of other things like maybe I'm having connectivity issues or performance issues. I can see the region my host is in. I can see things like the front door gateway it's coming into and things like that.
That sounds pretty cool. And I think I want to give background for folks that that maybe aren't as aware. I think the reason this question comes up is because in Windows 365 there is the option to just deploy to essentially a geography, and then there's an automatic. We handle exactly where it's going to go. For example, US West will handle whether it's going to be US West 2 or US West 3. So for folks that are coming from AVD, you're like, wait, what? You don't know which region you're in? We have the automatic like recommended. The service handles it. So just giving that context, because I think that for folks that are new to this, we're like, whoa, that's weird.
Yep.
Is it worth expanding? Sorry, I was going to say, is it worth expanding on that, on the capability of CPC move? So if you want to move your CPC, your cloud PC, you can now do that with CPC move. So if you did find yourself in a region where latency was too high, or whatever the reason might be, CPC can move the VMs in a provisioning policy to a different region. Now it is all of those, and obviously one of the things that we're working on is try to make that individual, so you can go and select, or at least the admin can go and select individual CPCs and move them individually.
That's a good call out, because we are adding regions as we continue to iterate and expand the service. And Tom, it's actually really interesting that you point that out, though, because in some of the test environments that I manage, I specifically have like a carve out for different users that I know that once we expand into that region, I want to move users to. Like, for example, right now, I think Brazil data center is a little bit more locked down. I think you have to submit a support ticket to get regional availability. But for the longest time, I had users that I had there, and I put them in a provisioning policy, be like, long term, you're going to go to Brazil. You're going to go to Brazil. And I put that specific provisioning policy in the next closest, which I think is South Central US. And then when we opened it up, I was like, all right, I'm moving you all. Let's go. So for folks that are aware and you want these, hopefully you do want these cloud PCs long term, feel free. That move feature is awesome. So yeah. And Tom, I don't know, can you speak to the global availability? Because I think we added new regions for Windows 365 lately.
Yeah, so we added 2 in Europe, which were Italy North and Poland Central. And it kind of coincides with a wider Microsoft piece of work, which is just to grow the Azure regions in Europe anyway. So there's a lot of demand, well, it's probably the same all over the globe, but we're currently seeing lots of demand in Europe. Hence why there's expansion of existing regions and the deployment of brand new regions. So Italy and Poland were the most recent Azure regions. So obviously, as a Windows 365 service that wants to be global and get CPCs as close to end users as possible and as close to the data as possible, we've enabled those two regions for organizations and users in those locations. The bigger topic, though, is that as a global service, we want to be truly global. So our end goal is to be as ubiquitous as the Azure regions are globally. Now, there is a long list of regions that are currently under construction, and then an even longer list of regions that are approved to be constructed. So in, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, there'll probably be an extra 20 to 40 Azure regions, brand new ones, as well as the expansion of some existing ones. So our plan is effectively to be in all of those regions as soon as it's viable from a service perspective. So that would just enable customers more locations to go and place their VMs or their CPCs, which would just enhance the service effectively. And a very similar thing applies to AVD. So obviously the difference, just in case people don't know, is that with AVD, the admin gets to choose any Azure region because it's an Azure service. So if they've got access to all regions, they can go and deploy their virtual machines in any of those available GA regions. So as soon as Azure releases a new region, that's available instantly to customers. The other thing is that we have obviously this control plane, lots of infrastructure that connects users to their virtual machines, as well as some other services like brokering, etc. Now that's currently in a subset of that total number of Azure regions. The plan there is also to roll out that infrastructure to as many regions as possible over the coming years, effectively. So again, that would reduce the latency for users distributed around the globe, because we're going to be placing the gateways, which is the core service that connects or that's responsible for latency for customers. Obviously with the exception of RDP short path, but where that's not possible, where UDP connectivity is not possible, it falls back to going via the gateway. So the more of those there are globally, the lower the latency is for those users where we have recently placed the gateway.
Right. Yeah, well, thanks for the kind of the descriptions. Yeah, I'm glad that we are expanding both Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. So like, again, all those regions. So this is the ak.ms/Windows 365/Azure regions. You can take a look at that. And then I think, Tom, you mentioned earlier, there was also the specific call out for the Italy and Poland for Windows 365. Yeah, so AVD for this one is ak.ms/AVD/locations. And then for that announcement of Italy and Poland, you can check out ak.ms/Windows 365/Italy Poland. Yeah, I think, thank you for describing all that. And I think that actually does relate. You said one thing at the end. You're talking about how gateways are essentially the core, connectivity for a lot of users. And you mentioned that short path kind of, can almost remove the requirement for the gateway. And so I did mention that in development. One thing our team is working on is short path return, leveraging the same kind of media relay servers, the same infrastructure or like similar infrastructure that the Teams, Microsoft Teams is based off of. And so we're working on that, and that will allow a lot more reliable and a lower latency connection because it uses UDP as opposed to straight TCP. So yeah, I think as we do both of those, work on short path and work on region availability, hopefully you as the users, the customers are seeing that improvement. Is there anything else folks wanted to kind of add on to that availability discussion? If not, we do have another question. This is from Charles on Tech Community. Is there a recommended method to connect from another allowed region other than the one the PC is provisioned in? Okay, I'm trying to decipher that question.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if I can take a stab at that one.
Okay.
So if the question really comes down to from the end user connecting and over the public internet, what you're connecting on through the app or the browser, it's going to try to find the closest gateway to come in. So you can be in one region and then have your cloud PC in another. And it's going to try to get you as close as possible to get on that Azure backbone. Because once you're on the Azure backbone, you're going to have a faster throughput to the endpoint. If the question is more about, let's say you have Azure resources in a region that Windows 365 doesn't support, how do you connect those to get your cloud PCs to talk to those? You can use VNet peering to tie the VNets together. That way, the traffic can be routed from the supported region to the unsupported region where your resources may be. So,
I think that hopefully answers where Windows 365 doesn't have the region, and maybe I'll take a more general approach if I'm interpreting the question. I think if you say, okay, well this cloud PC is in West US, and my user is not in West US, can they still connect? And ultimately, the answer is yes, because what Donna just mentioned is we try to find the nearest availability for gateways, connect you. So there's no inherent restriction of if your cloud PC is in West US that you also have to be in West US. That's definitely not the case. If you want some granular control like that, you can always use Microsoft Entra ID. You can do some conditional access fun stuff. If you really do care about the device state of what's connecting to the service, or even IP locations of your users' devices that are connecting to the service, lots of fun magic you can do in Entra ID. Which also, go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
I was just going to say the other thing, just to maybe press the point, is that the connectivity that enables users to connect from wherever they are to AVD or their Windows 365 Cloud PC is provided as a service, effectively. So customers don't need to worry or think about where it is or where the users are. We will automatically connect you. And perhaps it's just worth going back. There's actually one extra step that we haven't discussed, and that's just because it's all handled as a service. So there's another Azure service that's freely available that AVD makes use of. So, and that service is Azure Front Door, which is a content delivery network, effectively. Now, that service exists in not only the Azure regions, but also Azure POP locations around the globe. And there's in excess of 330 of these all around the globe. So those are going to be far closer to, populations of people, effectively. And that's the first entry point into the service. So we've got some code running on Azure Front Door that effectively detects where the user is and then determines which of the gateways is the closest based upon latency to that user. So, I suppose the point here is, like just stressing what Donna said, is we will connect the user wherever they are to whichever is the gateway with the lowest latency to get them into the service, and then that will then onboard them across the Microsoft network to wherever their virtual machine is, whether that's in the same region as the gateway or one that doesn't have it yet.
Right.
So all provided as part of the service, free of charge. You're welcome.
Yeah, and I think that's the great promise of both of these products is wherever you are in the world, wherever your for users, wherever your admin has put your resource, cloud PC, AVD, full desktop or a remote app, wherever you are, whatever you're trying to connect to, you can get there. And like I kind of mentioned on the whole Entra ID front, is all this uses is your work or school account. If you can do your username, password authentication, as long as you can authenticate to Microsoft Entra ID, then you can access your resource. And then there's all these knobs and levers that you can do afterwards to, like, again, restrict it. But like it's generally, we're trying to make sure you can connect and do your work or whatever your admin has provided for you.
Yeah.
I think, Christian, and not to get too far in the weeds on this, though, there is the idea of, kind of just good general network hygiene. And you touched on this in terms of UDP. Make sure UDP is available, especially if you are connecting across bigger geographical distances. Make sure you're not hairpinning in through your corporate network and out. That'll change the front door you're going into. Just all of those general good network hygiene things.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning or reminding folks. Another kind of key principle of both products. Generally connect from anywhere, any device, whatnot, but also that your resource, the cloud PC, the AVD VM, those do not require any inbound ports to be open in order for users to connect to them. So when you say like open up UDP, what we mean is the outbound. We have documentation and guidance on it, but outbound UDP from the VM to either like it's going to be turned servers or just out to just 443. So again, you're not actually exposing any inbound ports to the VMs. These are all outbound. So I wanted to reiterate that before folks get a little nervous.
Well, and also inspection on the device, through whatever network, type of control you may have on the device itself. So, but you're absolutely correct. No inbound ports.
Yeah, and so if the idea of trying to manage all of this network infrastructure and tying things together is kind of giving you some pause, we also have the Microsoft hosted network, which makes it really easy because then we take care of the whole thing for you. If you need to connect to corporate resources, use a VPN client, split tunnel. That's the key, because you don't want to have all of the traffic going into the corporate and then back out, like Doug was saying. The hair pinning inside your on-premise. It's a bad idea. But easiest way to go about it, MS hosted network.
Yeah. The other thing I was just going to say is on I suppose the slim chance we've got some people who are viewing this from, let's say, Argentina or southern Chile or something, but if they've looked at the Azure regions website, they'll notice there's a slight absence of regions in those locations, which is it's not fantastic for customers located down there. But just to reiterate my point around this list of Azure regions that are being developed, so some in construction, some yet to be constructed, but approved to be so, that situation is going to change going forward. If you're in one of those locations or geographies that doesn't necessarily have a region within your country or close by, in the coming years, Microsoft is going to effectively resolve that problem by this long list of regions that are going to be developed. So whilst it might not be fantastic for people in those locations at this point in time, Microsoft's going to improve that by building lots and lots of new Azure regions in those locations not currently covered. So a new region will be fantastic from an AVD perspective because it will be a GA straight away. We will then follow suit from a Windows 365 perspective to enable that region. So essentially, I suppose the point here is things are going to improve significantly in those regions not well covered by existing regions.
So growing global availability. Woo! All right. That was a great discussion. So thank you everyone for chiming in. We have another question from Tech Community. It is, this is from Richard on Tech Community. I need to find a way to have an AVD prompt every time a user logs on to their session for the Microsoft multi-factor authentication. I cannot figure out how to do that with conditional access. A client we have an AVD is used to an MFA. A client we have an AVD, a customer, is used to an MFA prompt for every PC login and expects to see that in AVD as well. It's psychological, but I've heard it's possible if we use the default Enforce MFA conditional access policy. If we have another policy just for AVD apps and choose every time as a condition, it does not work. That's a great question, and was sort of what I was alluding to in the in development portion of both Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. So if you want to take a look there, the Windows ak.ms/W365 in development. One of the features is integrating and supporting the conditional access control of sign-in frequency and then every time. Because we do know that there are scenarios like this that are required, but we do need a caveat that at this point, that control would actually be on an every 15-minute basis. It would not be every single time. So let's say that you connect to your resource, or your user connects to the resource, like maybe say the remote app, and then closes it, and then within 15 minutes they connect again. They would not be prompted. So essentially going down from 1 hour to 15 minutes, 15. Right now, that's sort of the limitation that we're hitting as we try to support this control. So let us know, Richard or others, if that would still meet your needs. I think if you do look at the sign-in frequency control, you'll notice that only a very select few other scenarios are supported, such as a high sign-in risk through the Microsoft Threat Protection or Intune registration. These are a lot more like one-off cases than an AVD/Windows 365 connection, and so that's why we're kind of hitting this. We're anticipating at least starting off with 15 minutes as opposed to every time. But please let us know what your thought and feedback is as we continue working on this feature.
Just in terms of feedback, the other thing that would be interesting is just to determine people's view of fatigue in regular re-authentications, let's say, or for users that are happy to sign in regularly for whatever their reason is, whether that having to repeat the MFA is going to be an overhead for end users. So if whoever's asked this could provide that feedback, that'd be interesting as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I know that even we've heard other customers and other companies say that we wanted to restrict it a lot, be a lot more frequent, but then the users were complaining, and then it was actually decreasing their productivity and a little bit more of an annoyance. So that's just the trade-off between the security and user experience. Yeah, so that was Richard. If you can give us feedback. Okay, a question from X, formerly Twitter. Can we use an on-prem domain controller for hybrid joined Windows 365 cloud PCs, or does it have to be an Azure domain controller? Donna, I'm going to tag you in.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, you can use an on-prem. It really comes down to network design. You need to have some way for your virtual network in Azure to be able to talk to that DC. So whether that's going to be a site-to-site, multiple site-to-sites, because you're going to want redundancy. In a lab scenario, a single site-to-site to one domain controller, that'll work. And massive production loads, you may want to look at expanding that and making that more robust. So you're going to want to look at having ways to fail over. Maybe you want to look at an express route. That way you're getting, the fastest throughput. You're getting the SLAs with that. It may make sense to host a domain controller in Azure and then replicate from on-premises. And my Active Directory is a little rusty these days. I'm assuming RODCs are still a thing, or something similar. So maybe you want to put a more protected RODC type domain controller in Azure and have that synchronize. What you'll also need to look at too as you're looking at hybrid join scenarios, and it's listed in the prerequisites. But you'll also need to look at the synchronization frequency between on-prem and Entra, because I think that's one of the checks that we do as well when we are doing the ANC checks. Is we need to make sure that synchronization is happening regularly, because we need to have that user data information, so your users can authenticate, the machines can join, that kind of fun stuff. So totally doable, but you'll want to really look at your network topology and determine what level of redundancy you want to put in. Look at that latency. There's lots of variables. You can go have a whole 8-hour deep dive session on this topic just for you and your just for your organization. So that's the high level view of it, but short answer is totally doable.
So I would add to that quickly, Christian. When we think about the mobility of devices, like with CPC Move and various DR scenarios, just because I've seen a couple people get caught by this, make sure that before you start doing those things that you've checked all of those important things that Donna just mentioned in terms of network paths, directory services, and so forth.
Yeah, and I think what both of you are mentioning is the Azure Network Connection is the one object that you have to associate to your environment if you want to use it. But you should be creating those objects for the different subscriptions or domains that you have, and that is your one-stop solution to get all the check marks. If there's not a check mark there, then that's something you should address and then test out before you expand. Because yeah, like Doug and Don, you both mentioned, hybrid join is part of that. Because as part of the provisioning, we want to make sure that we can do all the steps, so that way when the Cloud PC gets provisioned, it will be usable by the user. So yeah, definitely, if you are using Azure Network Connections, if you are doing hybrid join, take the time to create the objects, run, allow it to validate its checks, and then address any of the concerns that it raises.
Just one extra point there. Sorry, Donna, after you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so on that point of read-only domain controllers, so the whole purpose, the reason that type of domain controller was created was for branch offices, like distant branch offices where security might be slack, let's say, where the risk of someone stealing a domain controller is enhanced because it's not in your secure data center. So that's why it's read only, so you can't write to it. So it can't be stolen and then written to, and potentially someone takes over your domain. So actually, if you were just choosing to place a domain controller inside of Azure, there's little value of having a read-only domain controller because Azure is probably as secure as you could possibly get. And it potentially increases sort of the latency of any writes that need to be made from VMs that are up in, or users that are up in Azure. So it's probably just better just to have a stock standard domain controller. Maybe change the what's the term? The site link cost, I think it is. Increase that to reduce the times that it's replicating, maybe to save some bandwidth, for example.
Makes sense. While we're on the domain controller topic, I do want to give a quick highlight in just understanding on the. Is it still called Azure ID Domain Services, or did they change it to Entra ID Domain Services?
Entra Domain Services.
Okay, yeah, whatever that service is, there has been and continues to be a service where you can, from your Entra ID directory, instantiate and essentially create a domain controller as a service on an Azure subscription on an Azure virtual network that you control. But the domain controller aspect is being run as a service. I do want to highlight, remind folks that that service is not compatible with Windows 365 because on that service, you are unable to hybrid join VMs that you create because all the synchronization happens from Entra ID down to that domain controller and not the reverse. So it is possible. You can use that with Azure Virtual Desktop because there is no hybrid join or Intune like management requirement, but that is not compatible with Windows 365. So I want to call that out while we're talking about these domain controller stuff.
I'd like to take a moment to preach to the choir here. Sure, hybrid totally works. We get it. Lots of folks want it. But if you're going to be deploying Windows 365, this is about the perfect opportunity to really kick the tires on, just doing a cloud-only join. I'm working with a customer now, very, very large, and they're using that as their opportunity to modernize, moving fully to Intune, moving fully to Entra, getting away from ConfigMan, getting away from the hybrids. This is their big opportunity. So if you're just starting out to pilot, absolutely go ahead and try either the MS hosted with AADJ or do the VNet. Like, give it a try, see what works. I think a lot of folks come into, we need to do hybrid because we've always done hybrid and we don't know what breaks. It's a fantastic time to find out maybe you really don't need it after all. So please pilot, try it out. Just don't make that assumption, because doing the Entra joined only is so much easier for your admins, for your network admins. It really is a night and day difference in simplicity. So if you have to do it, go for it. We'll support you, but really take the opportunity to see if you can drag your organization a little bit more forward. So, and Grant.
Yeah, Don, I trust you out of everyone because you are a lot more heavily engaged with customers, getting them deployed. So I really appreciate that. And also, can you, my assessment, understanding from from hearing you and your team is that it sounds like the most successful deployments of Windows 365, it almost feels like it's kind of persona based and staged, as opposed to we're moving all 100,000 users over next week. Is that an accurate assessment? Is that something you'd also recommend for folks that are wanting to use Windows 365? Is like stage it in different personas, that way it can be like controlled?
Yeah. We've worked with lots of folks that have moved either from an on-prem or a different cloud provider, and instead of just doing a lift and shift, we're moving everybody over in one day. While the service can absolutely handle it, we've seen some fantastic provisioning times over the course of a handful of days. You do still need to look at those, who you're moving over, who needs to be trained. Do you need to deploy a new app? When you're looking at what type of licenses that you're going to buy, we've got all sorts of SKUs, down from low powered for good for just browser based workers. We've got GPU based workloads coming soon, so we've got everything in the middle, trying to figure out who's going to need what. So looking at those in a persona, where's your information workers, who's your shift workers, who's going to be your task workers, who needs to have what. Also looking at regions as well. Which region do you want to start at? Who has your most competent or friendly end users? You really don't want to start with the ones that are going to generate the most help desk tickets. So looking at this absolutely as a persona migration versus just a pure device migration is absolutely a valid and good way to approach an implementation.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another question from LinkedIn. Awesome. We're getting a lot of questions today from various sources. I love it. Can we have, this is from Fanny on LinkedIn. Can we have pooled AVD instances spread across multiple regions like US and India as part of the same host pool? So AVD instances, same host pool, but different regions. Tom, I'm going to defer to you.
Okay. So there's a few things to unpack here. So the first answer is yes, you absolutely can do that, technically. However, we wouldn't really recommend that for a few reasons. So the first is, when you go and deploy a host pool via the portal, in fact, however you deploy it, you can only give the virtual machines one Azure region. So they're all going to go to this particular region. Now, you can come along later and add session hosts to that host pool from a different region. So if you wanted to do this, you'd have to have two deployments. So one that creates the host pool and adds or creates the session host as part of that in region one, and then come along secondly via whatever deployment mechanism you're doing to add the session hosts into that host pool that might be in the second region, i.e. India. Now, the problem with that is we don't have any proximity-based load balancing. So if you've got users in those two locations, there's no guarantee that they're actually going to hit session hosts in the region that's closest to them. So this is kind of the reverse of what we've been talking about connecting users wherever they are to the closest instance of the AVD control plane, i.e. the gateways. But we don't have a mechanism to say this user is in the US, this host pool is spread across the US and India, connect the US user to session hosts that are in the US and vice versa with India. So there will be some users, probably 50% of the users in either location, who will be connecting to session hosts in the other region. So their latency is going to increase, and potentially they would notice that. We say roughly around about 150 milliseconds is sort of the maximum, before which time users start to see some degradation. Now, actually speaking to lots of customers, they have gone in excess of that without any sort of really noticeable degradation in the user experience. But it's just something, the physics is obviously what it is, and we would not really recommend users in India connecting to the US and vice versa if you can avoid it. So the way to avoid that is obviously to have 2 host pools dedicated for those regions. The other problem is user profiles. So the question did ask about pools. So in that context, we would recommend FSLogix to manage the user profile. So that the storage, but Doug's probably the expert, or definitely is the expert coming from his FSLogix days, but that VHD that holds the profile can only exist in one place whilst it's being accessed. Now, there is a thing called Cloud Cache, but I don't know if you've had Jason Parker on here before. If you have, he's probably explained the change in some of the recommendations around Cloud Cache, that it's not really designed for cross-region. Well, it's not really designed for this scenario. It's designed for disaster recovery. So, yeah, whilst you can use things like storage replication to replicate the profile to a different region, it's not really designed for this ability to dynamically allow users to be able to log in from different locations to the same host pool, which is spread across the 2. So I think whilst the answer is yes, the actual recommendation is don't do it. Create yourself 2 host pools dedicated for the regions and the users in those geographies. I don't know, Doug, have you got anything to add to that? Is that correct around FSLogix?
You got it spot on as far as what I would say. The only thing possibly to add is, if you were to try to separate the geographies of the backup location for Cloud Cache by that distance, that would probably impact the value of Cloud Cache, because the replication of the profile data across those geographical distances wouldn't be ideal.
Yeah.
So just another reason to follow your advice.
Yeah, I think so Tom, from your recommendation, you probably wouldn't want to do that just because there's all these dependencies that aren't as, there's a lot of other things that would have to line up in the product in order to really support that. So right now, just keep them separate. And in that, by keeping them separate, also like you'd have to train the users to just have them connect to the one that best matches, their current experience if they're traveling between the 2.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So hopefully that answered your question, Fanny, on LinkedIn. Another question on LinkedIn: is it possible to get the CPU type/model info for a cloud PC?
No, because this is a SaaS service. And so by saying that we're giving you X amount of cores, X amount of RAM, X amount of space, that takes out that management that the admin needs to do to make that determination. That's kind of the beauty of SaaS. What that also does is gives us on the back end flexibility to keep the service robust, to make sure that we've got sufficient cores. It's on the back end, it's not like we're going to swap you out with like a Celeron versus a Xeon. They're still all very good hardware. So that's a pretty common question for folks that are going in there. Well, how do I know for sure that I'm getting X? Well, that answer is AVD. AVD gives you that flexibility that if you truly need to control, what type of proc, how much RAM, all of that good stuff, please, by all means, use AVD. That's what it's there for. But for a SaaS service, that's not something that that we share. So no, but for good reason.
That's a really good point. Go ahead, Tom.
And then
I was going to say, it's worth adding that things like the recent announcement. So we've added a new SKU, wasn't it? 16 CPU, vCPU recently. And we've also in paid public preview is GPUs. So whilst we don't provide that detail, we are adding service plans or SKUs to the service to accommodate the use cases that demand a GPU, for example, or more power effectively. But again, just to stress Donna's point, if that's still not enough, then yeah, go to AVD. I've lost count now. It's impossible to keep up how many VM families there are, and then how many sort of t-shirt sizes inside of those families there are. It's well in excess, I think, of over 100 families, and then some of them have like 10 sizes within them. So there's just, you're spoiled for choice from that perspective in AVD.
Yeah, because Tom, even on the GPU front, there's so many there's so many different SKUs of GPUs. Each, like, they have their own like their own specialization. There's some that's good for the rendering more so than computation, or vice versa. So yeah, if you go to AVD, find out the VM SKU that you want, and really you need that one, and that's the only one that'll work. Yeah, what Donna and Tom are both saying is probably keep using on AVD, because again, we're, as a global service, we're trying to give you the performance, but we're not promising any specific underlying hardware. So okay, so hopefully that answered your question, Martin. Let's see. From the tech community, how can I get a static IP address assigned to a group of Windows 365 Enterprise Cloud PCs that are connected to an Azure Virtual Network? We need for all of the Cloud PCs to appear to have the same external Azure static IP address. So my observation is this feels like a network setup, because on the Microsoft hosted network, we don't do right now. We don't really do any specific IP address magic. We sort of take just the general, like, Azure default one. But if you need your IP addresses to be consistent, it sounds like you would need to have not the Microsoft hosted network. You have to bring your own Azure network connection and virtual network, and then from there it's all about doing. There's guidance on making sure they have the same outbound IP address. I don't know all the variations, but I think there's like 3 or 4 ways that you can do that on a network that you control, and then you would just associate that with your Azure network connection, so that way your Cloud PCs get provisioned there. Do folks have any other guidance or thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's Azure NAT Gateway. I think that's the one that provides a single IP address behind which everything then is snatted, I think is the term. There's also, what is it? So Azure Firewall, and then also software load balancer. I'm not sure whether that does provide the single IP address, but there's loads of documentation up on all of these and all the variations and nuances.
Yeah, I do recall that there's one, because this question comes up so often, I guess, for Azure in general. There is one article. I don't have it now. Maybe we can, try to find it. But there is this one article that the networking team has posted on their documentation site that goes through these 4 or 5 options and gives you recommendations on why or why not you should use it, like based on which scenario. So, yeah. Moral of the story, I think, is bring your own virtual network, and then follow their guidance to get the single outbound IP address for your Cloud PCs. Okay, so moving off of networking, from Marcel on LinkedIn, is it recommended to use the Microsoft Entra ID single sign-on in a BYOD scenario? Since there is not a managed endpoint there's no control over the Entra ID token being stored on the endpoint. So that's a great question. Any thoughts?
Well, I would say from a user experience perspective, have single sign-on all the time, all day long. I'm not 100% sure about the second part. I'm not sure why that's a problem necessarily, or even if it is a problem. There's no control over the Enter ID token being stored on the endpoint. Okay, maybe we can get some more detail around why that might be a problem, but I know from briefly reading the question, I would say yes, it is recommended.
Yeah, I know that even like even for us, I've noticed that there's different connection policies based off if you're coming from a managed device versus you are using an unmanaged device. So I think it might make sense to have different policies. Like again, especially the single sign-on, it's governed by Enter ID, so you can do the conditional access. Marcel, if you were on earlier, we were talking about the sign-in frequency control, the every time control that we're starting to work with. That's in development, and it's more of a 15-minute control as opposed to every time. So I do agree that maybe there's different time durations for those policies. But in general, I think it does, like Tom mentioned, help the user experience to do the single sign-on, which can leverage. The biggest thing also is that because the log on to the cloud PC is governed by Enter ID, then you can use passwordless. And you can, with passwordless, you can even do all the additional controls, like requiring users to use a phish-resistant MFA as opposed to a simple not phish-resistant MFA. So, especially because it uses Enter ID for authentication, that's, I think, a big win. And also, you can plug it into conditional access, as opposed to like on non-Windows devices being forced to just use your password if you don't have Enter ID single sign-on configured. Donna, just from your experience, have you noticed? Because I mentioned that I think I've experienced having different policies based off unmanaged versus managed. Have you seen anything with customers and what their thoughts are?
Oh, it depends on the sector. I've had some customers that currently aren't allowing a BYOD because they're looking for ways to ensure that they're looking for MAM policies, essentially. So they want to be able to make sure that the endpoint they're connecting from has their antivirus, that they're encrypted, that they're meeting certain conditions. And certain platforms, we have that available now. And I'm pretty sure we just released that into browser as well. So those types of functionalities have come into play. But yeah, I've had customers that they aren't really necessarily concerned at all about their BYOD. They're leveraging the passwordless. They're leveraging MFA. So it's, I think it's more of an individual organization stance in what they really want versus a more of a blanket. That kind of makes sense.
I think so. We do have what was it? I was trying to see. We have only 7 minutes left. I think there's one more question I want to get to as well before we start to wrap up.
Just while you're reading that, Christian, whilst in the last question, I think I found the article you were referring to in our previous question around the outbound internet access, and there it is. So for viewers that want to read that article, just take a look at that link you can see there.
Perfect. Yeah, the ak.ms/avd/default outbound access. Cool. Thank you for for finding that. Okay, so there is one last question that we can jump on here. This is from Victor on the tech community. Any chance to add a feature to remote desktop client to inform users whose cloud PCs are in grace period? So I think that's I think that's a great suggestion. And two, I'm actually curious, Victor, if you're able to use the Windows app that's in preview, I believe it would have the functionality that you're looking for, because it's the same user experience that you would access when you go to windows365.microsoft.com. So yeah, I'd suggest follow the link ak.ms/Windows app to find the Windows app that's in preview on whichever platform you're using, whether it's iOS, Mac, Windows, or the web client. we're working on Android right now, but we have not released that to preview yet. So let us know how that goes. Also, for this feature or for other feedback, please do provide us feedback at ak.ms/W365 feedback to ensure that, you know, outside of these AMAs, that we're also still hearing it and also able to answer your questions like right now. So please do continue using that feedback channel. Okay, well, so we have last 5 minutes. I want to leave time to each of you to describe, you know, one thing that customers should do, check out as we wrap up. So Donna, I'm gonna start with you. You're you're the first here.
Well, what isn't there to check out? You know, I guess my favorite one is probably Frontline, which is, you know, a really neat way to you can, you know, lower your per user cost with service. And that's a whole nother deep dive topic as well, but that's one that's near and dear to my heart. So if you haven't played around with that, if you have users that don't need the 24/7 access to their cloud PCs, you do have, repeatable shifts that are that your organization is doing. Maybe you're doing, you know, help desk that follows the sun type of thing. Absolutely that out. There's more to come on that one for sure. So that would be the one I would say to absolutely check out.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's the ak.ms/W365 Frontline GA. Yeah, Frontline's awesome. All right, Doug.
I'll give a self-serving promo here just because I saved myself with my own feature a couple days ago. I messed up my school account or working school account on my cloud PC and could no longer connect. And by using point-in-time restore and going back 12 hours, I was able to fix my own problem. So just if folks have not tried point-in-time restore and trained users, if they allow their users to do a self-serve point-in-time restore, it's a great way to save your help desk time and to solve problems when a CPC becomes unreachable.
+1 for that feature. That's, I've heard some folks try to discuss, like, why would I give you users a cloud PC when I give them a physical? Well, point in time restore is a great one right there.
Awesome. And Tom, and what's your send off?
So this is very much AVD specific, but it's definitely worth a shout out. That obviously the whole purpose of AVD and Windows 365 for that matter is to connect human beings through to applications so that they can be successful in their day job and make their organization successful in whatever business that they're in. So applications really are the key to the kingdom. So we've made some very significant improvements in app attach recently, which elevates the user and the application. So in the past, it was all around host pools being the sort of the unit of administration, as you mentioned at the beginning. But it's definitely worthwhile taking a look at the improvements that have been made, because it's now all about the application and it's all about the user. So you assign an app to a user regardless of the host pool, and that's the relationship. And it's just about making the entire process, like I said, of connecting these people wherever they are to the applications that they need to be successful. So have a look at that link there.
Awesome. Yeah, the ak.ms/app attach preview. Perfect. Well, thank you for joining. Tom, I hope this was a great first session, that you'll come back again.
Thanks for having me. Happy to come back anytime.
And everyone that's joining live, listening on recording, I hope you'll have a great rest of your day, afternoon, evening, and you can check us next time, next month, and keep coming back to Windows in the Cloud. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.